Hello, Midnight TCG members. This is Midnight Fox. We're coming to you with this week's Competitive Edge podcast. This week we have Genzaki recording in the background. We have Genzo.
Hello.
And we have Kyo.
Hi.
Eddie had to duck out because he had a late night with the Super Bowl. This week we decided we did a viewer's choice poll, and two of the items we had up for a vote kind of tie into each other. So we decided this week we're going to do budget deck building, and we'll go ahead and tie reprints into that as well. So budget deck building, meaning as a whole, a lot of it you're going to be looking at the younger kids as one of your groups who's going to be looking to build a deck on a budget. Newer players to the game who haven't been in the game for a long time and are looking to get a competitive deck put together. They're going to look at budget building. So there's a plethora. Some people just don't want to spend out the money to pay for an expensive deck that, with the rate of re-releases, reprints, that you're just going to waste your money buying these expensive cards. So tonight we're going to be your best friends when we talk about budget deck building. So tonight we're going to start off with Genzo. Let's start a little discussion about what do you think about budget deck building? Like people who are going to use it, best ways to abuse it, so on and so forth.
Start now?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. So yeah, budget building is in my opinion, probably one of the most relevant aspects of the game, because you just think, I would think that the majority of players who play this game are casual, collectors, or maybe indifferent. And what I mean by that is you have your competitive player base, and I think there needs to be clarity about that statement. If you play this game, you're a competitive player. So when somebody says, well, if I'm a budget player or a fun player, I understand what they're saying, but I also understand that they're competitive. Maybe you can grade, like I'm slightly competitive, I'm competitive on an average level, or I'm super competitive, sure. But if you're playing this game and you draw 6 cards to start your turn, you're competing, so everybody's competitive. So I think, like I said before, that budget playing is pretty much, I would say, I don't know, I don't want to give it a percentage because you could be wrong there, but I would just say a large part of the community are budget players. Either, strictly budget, or, they'll spend some money to get 80 to 90% of a deck. So I just think it's kind of relevant, and so it comes to understanding what you have to do, what you have to be a budget player, and not only be a budget player, but be the best you can be at it, because you have to have timing, you have to have the knowledge. So where that all comes in is, say you have the core of a deck, let's say 28 cards, and then say those last 12 cards are the money cards. Should I put the money here and get the cards now where they're high, or wait, because we're now in a game where I don't think you can complain about reprints anymore. In my opinion,
that was the difference. When UDE, I remember the days when UDE was running it right before Konami took it back over, when Teledad decks were going for $1,200 a pop. Do you remember those days? Were you playing during that time?
Yes.
Glad Beast Heraclinos, $200 for over 6 months. ridiculous.
And that's just an individual card, like Judgment Dragon and Dark Arm Dragon. In the days of Teledad, you were spending money to play the supposed best deck.
And then the funny thing is you could have those people who go out and spend that money, but unless you understood the engine, you're still going to lose.
Well, I'll say this. That deck was so good that even if you are or were one of those players who just spent the money because you could, that deck would gift you a lot of wins. And it would possibly get you tops that you wouldn't have earned any other way because that deck was so good. Like, you could stumble into wins.
It would gift it to you, but if you were playing against, like when you got to top 8, top 4, if you didn't understand the deck, you were losing. If you were playing against just other budget players who not going to go out and spend all that money, then yeah, you could gift through that with that. But then again, there were some rogue decks that would completely catch you off guard and take you in a different direction. Like before they became more popular, I ran as my anti-meta to Lightsworn during that time in Teledad. I ran a volcanic deck that ran 3 counters so that I could, and it ran, of course, burn, so I could burn away their life points and put them into a lock where they couldn't attack me with any of their monsters, or else they lose the game. So it was quick, remove with Dimension Walls, Magic Cylinders, Meteor of Destruction, so on, all the burn cards, so that I could get them down as far as possible and lock them into not being able to attack me, because they're going to lose the same amount of life points I did.
Well, I do want to say that I agree with the crash and burn theory, but I just have a difference in opinion, as I think it happens earlier. If you're just the person spending all that money to get a deck because you went online and saw that a deck did well and then bought all the cards, you're going to come into difficulty a lot quicker than top 8. Like, those kind of like iffy rounds 1 through 5, where you may play a top deck or you may play a rogue deck, an anti-meta deck. Sure, that's where those gifts are going to come from. But, past that, I think, like I said, I agree with you. Like, those players crash and burn, I just think they crash and burn earlier.
What about you, Kia? What's your thoughts on budget players?
Well, for budget player, with the reprints nowadays, budget player have a lot more chances to get a competitive deck. As a good example is the Dino Rabbit one, because I know a guy at my local. He's been away from the game for like 6 months already, and he went to a local recently, just built a deck, Dino Rabbit deck on the spot, just that morning, and he topped it easily.
And I mean, that's one thing Konami's done right but done wrong. They're really forcing the hands on some of the players to try to keep up. I mean, for the longest time we had our rogue deck players, but a lot of budget deck players are conforming. It's a good thing, bad thing that Konami does reprints the way they do. Because some of us see these decks and like, oh, I could do this and this and this with it, with these cards, and okay, cool, this got reprinted. But then that also plays the playability of the game and the interest in the game, because everybody starts playing it. That was like Chaos Dragons. Basically, for the most part, you could go out and buy 3 Dragons Collide structure decks, throw together your basic skeleton of it, pay for a few cards, and you had a deck that was competitive. That's probably the best example in latest history of a deck that you could just go out and buy 3 copies and you had a competitive deck. Other than
Gravekeepers.
Gravekeepers, yeah.
Yeah, that's another one.
Deck came out. And the Dark World. Those would be top 3 probably latest releases that you could play straight out of the box. 6 Sands is okay, but Unfortunately, everybody had us thinking we were going to get Legendary Six Samurai Shien in that, and we didn't. We got Shadow of the Six, which is decent, but the heart and soul of competitive Six Sams is that Spell and Trap Lockdown and LSS Shien. That's your lock in that.
Yes, but with Gateway and with the Shadow of the Six Samurai, it's still possible to OTK without Legendary Six Samurai.
It's possible, but Legendary Six Samurai Shien, if you get that in an Churia Beast or a Great Shogun Shien, against most decks you have the win.
Yes.
Because you can really limit what your opponent can do in the spell and trap zone. And other than like Zen mains hitting, which a lot of people, when it got reprinted, started running compulsory again. And that's the only thing I could say. The positive thing is people start to look at other options in the game. Because I know, for the most part, your basic skeleton of a deck before all these reprints like Zen Mains, Leviair, everything that was hard to get before started getting reprinted was 3D Prisons, a Mirror Force, a Dark Hole, a Monster Reborn, a couple Bottomless, anything that would purely destroy or remove. And then when we got these reprints, people started to look back at cards that were going to skirt the abilities of like Zen mains. Because basically your opponent would just set it out and let you attack it because they're going to get free destruction, and most people are not going to, some people are not going to think ahead, and they're going to leave a card or two on their field for destruction. The smart duelist is going to clear their field, leave it open so that they have to waste their Zen Main's effect on their card. But that's the one thing I do like about reprints, budget building, with the reprint factor coming into it, is that people are starting to look at cards that have been overlooked for quite some time. Because everybody sees these, I gotta play this. I gotta play Zen Mains. And I'll admit, I'm one of those people. I have to have at least one Zen Mains in my deck and one Leviair.
Well, it's not a bad card to have in your deck.
Yeah.
In most decks.
And I have to have a black ship just to get rid of my opponent's Zen Mains.
I'm still a Papal Operative man. And players, it's cheaper.
Actually,
but hey, I think we need to go ahead real quick and try to define the budget player, though. I mean, I kind of started us off on the wrong foot, but we should really try to do that. Like, so what's your definition of a budget player?
My definition of a budget player, to me, a budget player, other than what I'd already said about, who are the people who's mostly going to be looking to do it on a budget, I think it's more defined in being able to pick up cards for the least amount of money. So, to me, building on a budget, you definitely have to be willing to trade. You have to know your values, and it's kind of like a stock market. You have to keep an eye out to the news to see what's possibly going to get reprinted, because you don't want to send out $50 worth of trade for a card that's going to get reprinted, and then it's going to drop down for that version to $10 or $15. You just wasted your money. So, budget players, I think, are the people who keep their ear to the wind for rumors. All those rumors don't always prove true, but about 85% of the time, they do. There's that factor, and then there's your people who wait for the reprints, because Konami has gotten really good about releasing reprints fairly quickly. We talked about a lot of them. Rabbit, Zen Mains, Leviair, top cards for highly competitive decks just reprint it quickly. Maxx C, Effect Veller, things that were becoming staples. Solemn Warning. Solemn Warning is even in a common now. Solemn Judgment is a common now. Just getting reprinted so quickly. So there are those budget players who wait for the reprints. And then the last one I want to say that I see as a budget player are the people who reprints. Sorry, I had the third one on my mind, and I was mentioning it pre-podcast. For me, the third budget player in my mind is going to be the person who, if they can't get a hold of the meta card they need, they're going to start looking through their collection for something that plays along the same lines. It's probably not going to be as fast as what the card is like back in the days of Soul Control, when Bottomlesses and Sakuretsus and Mirror Forces were harder to get a hold of. I looked at Forceback. This was before I got a really huge collection, and I really don't have that worry. But back in the day, I had to look for, as myself a budget player, other options. Forceback was an option. It was a good way to stop Monarchs from hitting the field, because that was prevalent in that day and time. So to me, my third look when I look at a budget player are people who can go through a collection and find something that's comparative to what meta. So I kind of combine those three into my view on what a budget player is. Either they wait for the reprints, they look for something that's comparable, or they get the basic skeleton and they look for the best value and they trade for it instead of going out and spending money. What's your thoughts on a budget player? How do you see a budget player?
Well, first I want to mention that I brought this up again so we actually get a definition for what we believe a budget player is, but to also plug an article I'll be posting on Midnight TCG shortly, hopefully, about the budget player. But I want to go back to what you said. I think those are all qualities of a budget player versus different types of a budget player. Because if you're a budget player, you need to have all those things you just talked about. So I wanted to put that in there. But here's a little snippet from my upcoming article and how I feel. And after I read this to you, I want you to give me your thoughts on what I say. So here we go. What is a budget player exactly? A budget player is a player who by circumstance or by choice intends to compete against and or in the meta and reach desired results in a cost-effective manner. What do you think?
Fairly standard.
I think that pretty much embodies, kind of like you said, it pretty much embodies everything in a description of what I just said. Yeah, I mean,
yeah,
that's basically the definition of what a budget player is. We're looking to spend the least amount of money and still be competitive.
Exactly. So I was sitting here thinking while you were talking, and you were hitting these words that were just popping in my head. And it started making me think about the game in the past. Because I can remember a time in the past, I'm pretty sure we can all remember times in the past. The fact of money cards hasn't changed. The difference is that there's more of them and at a higher price now. I mean, just like every pack, continuously, more and more and more money cards. And so I started thinking, because we're going to talk about reprints, how have reprints changed the game, since I believe reprints are so key to being a successful budget player. And what I come to right here listening to you talk was, I think back in the day, and I'm pretty sure a lot of the players who have played it as long as I have will agree with this, that decks were fairly, or they were less different. There was a kind of consensus deck that was the best. Now, did it win all the time? Not necessarily, but it won a majority of the time. And so the thing that separated players back then were their decision making, how well they actually understood the game, how well they understood what was happening in any given game state, and how they can translate that into the cards they play, when they play, how they respond, how they attack. Now, I think reprints have given access to the largest group of players, every player, if you will. They have access to any card they want. Is access total and infinite? No. But you have much easier access to a larger number of cards now. And a lot of it comes down to just having patience to wait for it to be reprinted. So I think what the thing that separates the most competitive players from the budget players now is not the decision making that can separate you if you're playing an anti-meta deck or what was considered a rogue deck. Now it's whoever's willing to pay the money immediately will have the better chance at success. But the reprints allow players to stay somewhat competitive. It's like introducing parity.
I think the other thing for a budget player is to also keep ahead of the game, because there are rogue decks that turn into top tier decks, and you want to get those cards early when they first release. One I'm looking at right now, and I believe it comes out in Lord of the Tachyon Galaxy, and I want to get it a hold of before it gets too expensive, is Photon Satellite, because it's a deck I've been fiddling with. It's Photons and Gagas, and it's a level manipulation deck. And I've seen a lot more people picking up on Photon Satellite since I've been playing. It's kind of like Torbus. It was overlooked for so long until people realized how powerful that card could actually be. Is it the most powerful card in the game? No, but it does create an engine. It's just understanding, like you said, your people understanding the mechanics. It's easier to get the mechanics because you're able to get a hold of those cards, whereas when you played them back in the past and it was purely a money game, the way you were going to win is you were going to have the top cards. When UDE was running it, was it's like, I'm not even going to look at it, I'm not even going to try to understand it. Now with the rate of reprints, since we are kind of going to go over those too, people do really start to look at the mechanics. Hey, give me a second, I want to look at this card before you just take it off the field, to see if it, even if it's not going to be reprinted, to see if it's worth investing. I think that's another quality of a budget player. They rate whether a card or a deck type is worth investing in. Is this going to be a dead deck? Is it going to be hit? I know a lot of people, myself included, who were sure Rabbit was going to get hit on the last ban list, who got rid of their secret rares quickly. And then it got semi-limited and reprinted in Super. So, hindsight, yeah, it was probably a good thing I got rid of it, because it did get reprinted as a Super, but I was sure it was going to get banned or limited, which would have really killed its playability even more. So, maybe a good decision, bad decision I made as myself, a budget player. And I do still sort of consider myself a budget player when it comes to new cards releasing. When it comes to the older cards, I pretty much got everything. But like the last couple sets, I can't say I have a whole lot of it, and I have to do a lot of trading for it. So I really weigh my options when it comes to what people are looking for off of my list, or what I'm willing to go out and buy, what I'm willing to invest, because when is it going to get re-released, or how long is this actually going to be viable? Because Dino Rabbit it's still competitive, but not as competitive as when it first hit, when we just had the very few Xyz monsters. Konami's been really good about pushing out their new types. Really hardcore. Comments?
Yeah, I can see where you're coming from with that. And I do agree that with reprints, there's a lot of people that can build budget deck now. Yeah. So what's your thought on that, Ginzo?
Yeah, I just want to reiterate another talking point that you had in that, which is it's very important. Well, I guess I'll start it off like this. The players who are going to spend the money to have every card they want, so they have the best version of what they consider to be the best deck, you have to realize that not only are they putting the money into getting said cards, they're also going to be putting the time in, finding out card interactions, card rulings. So as a budget player, you almost have to work harder, if that's possible, and you don't want to overlook the work that competitive players put in. But as a budget player, it really has to be at the forefront of your mind, as well as being aware, you know?
This is where I tell the people who are just insistent, they don't want to play online. Dueling Network and in the past, YVD are your best friends. That really gives the budget players, and a lot of our budget players were members of YBD and do play on Dueling Network. That gives you an idea on what's worth an investment.
Yeah, but I want to get to DN a little later because Keo brought something up, and I think we really need to touch base with that. But getting back to the previous statement was being aware of your rulings, your card interactions, your budget version of decisions. Like, I don't want to encourage anything except for thinking on your own. But me and Fox were talking about before we started the podcast, Jirak Guaiba as a talking point, because Jirak Guaiba is more difficult to come by than, say, Hydrogeddon. So if Jirak Guaiba is out of your budget, a comparable card would be Hydrogeddon. So you have to be aware of those things. You know, what if you have the core of a deck, what can you add in to, you know, you're never going to replace the best version of an idea, but maybe fill in until you can get said card. You know, so being aware in that aspect, being aware of your rulings, card interactions, as I've mentioned, and also keeping up on the forums wherever you may visit. Hopefully it's Midnight TCG, but keeping up with the coming packs so you can have, I don't know, like that foreshadowing of what's to come. You know, because if you're working on understanding the game better, when you see these new card effects, you don't have to see the card necessarily. You don't have to have it in your hand testing it. You can pretty much have 80% assuredness that this card's going to affect the game or this card will not. So how should I invest appropriately? You know, also another aspect is being a great trader. You know, knowing how to trade up in value. All good points to talk about.
That's why I like Dueling Network, is because it gives you a good idea on what's going to be effective. I hate to say that I need to really see how cards, in our terms we use, synergize with each other. How is your deck going to synergize? Because you could have a fantastic build, but if the cards don't play together, if you can't use a hand at any given time, then your budget building is worth nothing.
Yes.
Because you're going to draw into dead hands. So it's keeping up with that meta, but it's also understanding that when you're going to build on a budget, if something's outside of it, you have to make sure that you're picking the right card that can replace that more expensive card until it gets reprinted or it does come within your budget.
And also understanding your build and what exactly it does or what exactly you want it to do. I have a friend, I've watched him play in tournaments, and he has fairly decent versions of decks that we all know. It's not like he doesn't have a lot of the key cards. Like, he'll have the cards and be playing, and he doesn't see the run. You know, you have to, just like you said, with any hand you draw, whether it be in the early game, the mid game, the late game, you have to know what your options are, you know? You have to understand, and I guess maybe that's one of the most important words in this podcast today will be understanding.
I think I'm gonna pass it over to Keo on this because he actually made a pretty interesting deck that makes Inzectors more budget. So why don't you discuss your Plant Zectors deck, Keo, as a budget deck? Because it really does. It lowers the price on Inzectors.
With many of the
with your
budget deck.
With your Gigaplant, your Gigaplant engine that runs Inzectors.
Yeah, it's just a common Injector splash in with plan to make it work more efficient. The thing is with the only, like with Ginter said, there is a certain amount of investment you need to do even if you're a budget player, because with Injector everything in the main deck can be get really cheaply, less than $10,
except for your Hornets.
less than $20.
Your Hornets are going to be more expensive, but other than that, yeah.
No. Hornets about $3 to $4 now.
Is it lower? Ooh.
Yeah, it's nobody should be charging more than that.
I might have to look into getting 3 Hornets again. Now the price dropped.
It's at 1, so not like you're gonna use any more than that. But still, the thing is with the main deck, it's really budget. Financial is an indefinition. But the matter with Inzector is that they XYZ a lot. They exist summoning a lot. So there's a certain amount you have to invest into the exist monster. Like with TRS, even though it's fairly, you can get them the common version now, it's still at least around $5 each.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And even running Dimensional Prisons, they're released as a commons, but it's $8 for a common.
Yes, they are.
Tiras? No, I picked 3 Tirases up this past weekend for around $4 to $6 a piece.
Oh no, I'm talking about D-Prisons. D-Prisons.
Oh, D-Prisons. Oh, okay.
D-Prisons, yeah.
As a common, $8 a piece.
Yeah.
Thunder King, same thing.
But that's a pretty important aspect as well. What Keo's talking about is that, again, when I was talking earlier about how we could grade budget players by competitiveness, whether they're slightly competitive or super competitive budget players, I think the higher up you get, the more competitive the budget player is. A key thought that has to always be with them is they're out to not invest as much, but they do realize there is a cost to play this game.
And I think that's the change we've seen in the game since Konami took over versus UDE. Is I know a lot of players who just quit the game when Konami took over and started reprinting everything like crazy because they were just out to make the money. They were out to go to the tournaments, get the big cards, cheat people, swindle people in trades, and try to make a huge profit. So, you know, I'll give Konami props to that, and I think that's really where they were going with reprints, was killing the secondary market.
I honestly think the secondary market is the worst aspect of this game.
Yeah.
It is. There are so many criminals. It's just pathetic.
Yep. For a children card game, yes, it certainly is.
But anyway, to keep the conversation moving along, I wanted to talk real quick about some reprints, because I think it's probably time to start moving to that section anyway, that have really just opened up the access to take in any of your budget decks before their reprint and just really revitalize them, giving them new power, new strength. And we're talking about Leviair, Zenmaines, Shockmaster, Solemn Warning, Pot of Duality, Rescue Rabbit, Tour Guide, Maxi. You know what I mean? I mean, those are some pretty important cards that can be the wheelhouse of a lot of decks.
Now, I tell you, one other thing that plays into that when you talk about that is it drives the price up on the cards that go with it. Like, yeah, Tour Guide got really cheap, but getting a hold of a Tour Bus now, if you like to run that engine, is a lot harder.
Well, I think it's still easier to get a Tour Bus now than when it first come out, because people really thought that was going to change the Tour Guide engine, and it doesn't, you know, for the majority of decks, the majority of strategies. So I think it's actually, I mean, I would grade the card from about $8 to $12. I would not pay any more if I was a person looking for Tour Bus.
I think one of the more impactful ones, other than, of course, people who want Leviair, Shockmasters, and Zenmaines, of course, those are pretty much now extra deck staples. One that has really made an impact on the game is Rescue Rabbit. It's opened up so many venues where people, when Rabbit first released, were just looking strictly at Dino Rabbit because of Logia and Doka. And even those got reprinted. But now people are looking at different versions. I have quite a few myself. There's your Macro Rabbits, your Water Rabbits. I've even built Zombie Rabbits. So I like the way they reprinted that, and people have taken it in much different directions. Now,
I think it's one of the best reprints in a long time. And I would, if we would have spoke when you were talking about players getting rid of Rescue Rabbit in fear of a ban, I would have helped you, because there was no way that was getting hit to one or banned. There was no way possible. Especially the TCG at that point still had, what, a year and a half before the Evil Swarms came. Like, they're not going to hurt their product before it's released. Like, Rescue Rabbit was going to stay, and I don't see it getting hit this next ban list. It just wouldn't make sense.
Now,
like,
that's one.
I'm not gonna say hold me to it and say they won't put it to 1, but I would think that's a mistake, and I just don't see it happening. But it could. Anything can happen.
You mentioned Evil Swarms. I want to hit on that. That is a deck that has been getting a lot of hype. So
yeah,
for any budget players, when those first hit, snatch them up, because from what I've seen, from what I hear, when I look on other forums, when I look on Facebook and I see Facebook pages, I look at articles, there's a lot of talk of Evil Swarm. So if you are a budget player and you want to go to that deck, get it quick. Don't wait, because then if you're a budget player, you're not going to be playing it for a while until they reprint it, or however your budget goes. You're not going to be playing it for a while, because it has turned out to be a highly competitive deck online.
Also, just a little add on to that, and since Evil Swarm is coming with Constellar, and there will be a lot of Constellar player, it's the best time to get it as cheap as possible.
And a lot of people are really liking the Constellar, the one that overlays over another Constellar.
Well, you can be guaranteed that will not be released at a decent price. Everybody wants that card because it can be played in so many things besides Constellars. Because I think Constellars is just one of those hype decks. And so it would be a good choice for a budget player. But Ptolemy Messier 7, I think is the name of the Ixies we're talking about. Yeah. That's not going to go cheap.
No.
That's going to at least hit the market at $25, I imagine.
Your best bet is to try to get that box and hope you pull it.
Yeah. Or can trade quick for it.
Yeah. You better get someone early, because Evil Swarms and that Constellar, the 7 are going to be probably your higher priced cards in the coming market. So this is kind of our forecast on the Midnight TCG podcast at some possible good things to look at if you're a budget player to pick up quickly. Don't wait. Don't wait.
There's some others too, like I think the Phantom Beastcraft.
Yes.
Like that's got a lot of hype now, and it's a fun deck. But I think it's gonna, upon release, be like Gustos. It won't be as bad as Ice Barrier, but or Constellars for that matter. Like they do stuff. I just don't think realistically over a 10-round tournament that's going to be your best choice if you have X amount of money to spend on whatever you want. Because I don't think it's going to hold up to Fire Fist at this point, or Mermail, or even Wind Up.
And for those of you who waited on Harpies, you should have got it while it was cheap because they're getting more and more. So the price on Harpies, anything Harpy, is really going up. So here's our little stock market quote to you. Harpies, it's too late. Pet Dragon itself is up to $75 a pop.
And that's ridiculous. That card is not worth it at all.
No.
At all. Even when the stuff is here, that card is not worth that at all.
Not at all.
Let's go ahead and throw out what Kiwi was talking about, because I think it's pretty important, and I think it's something that's really affecting the game, but it also surprises me that it hasn't affected the game even more than it has, which is Dueling Network. And also Dev Pro or Yu-Gi-Oh! Pro, whatever that is. I know it's getting a lot of buzz right now. If you're a budget player, so much so to where even structure deck investment just puts you off, Dueling Network. You can play whatever deck you want, with whatever cards you want, at any quantity you want, and it's free.
And that really gives you a idea of your engines and to see if the investment's worth it or not. Come on, Theo.
True.
Come on, we want to
Yes.
hear you talk. We're talking about Dueling Network and testing and, how it plays into your decisions on investments.
Well, if just in time investment, it's a very fun and interesting place where you can build your deck with the pictures and effect, and even with the upcoming card that's gonna be released in TCG will be available there. So it's very good to look forward to what deck you want to build. And you can also test it out against other players around the world. Although I would suggest play with your friends better.
Yeah, play with people you know who understand the game.
That's the bad side.
And
That's
if
the
you're a
downside.
member of Midnight TCG and you're on there playing on Dueling Network, pass the side on. I do.
And I also hope you have a better connection than me. I have to play in real life, so I have to invest into the game because my connection is so bad since I live out in the boonies.
Oh, I have a stellar connection.
I'm jelly.
I pay a pretty penny for that stellar connection. I got cable. So, yeah.
Nice.
It's very expensive. But I think we're getting off topic here.
Yes.
The big thing, as far as your budget players, we've touched on it. Really, you have to keep as a budget player, you have to keep your ear to the wind. And, we're talking about Dueling Network. That's a good place to keep your ear to the wind. If you see a lot of a certain deck being played, you might want to learn that engine and you might want to explore it yourself. It gives you a chance to go back and go to Google and Wikia and see how certain types play together to see, what's a coming meta deck. What would I possibly want to invest in? For me, if I'm going to invest in a meta deck, I'm going to invest in something that I really have a strong feeling Konami is not going to re-release quickly. Other than that, I mean, like rabbits, I kind of had a feeling, and I'd heard loads and loads of talk about it being released, but I thought, no, like I said, I thought it was going to get limited or banned. So I thought, no, it's not worth keeping. Get rid of it while I can. And I was wrong. So, I mean, yeah, you really have to know your game, and you have to see where a lot of your players are going, because that'll give you an idea of where the meta's going and cards you might want to pick up rather quickly.
So how do you think we end this? Because I think I have one last cool little thing we can talk about for the budget player who is actually concerned with what we have to say. So if we're getting about to wrap up time, I think we have a good ending, if you will.
Well, let's talk about, well, before we go to the ending, let's talk about some good decks that can actually be played on a budget.
That's
decks.
That's the ending I was talking about.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, for me, I have become, since it has become a lot cheaper with the reprint, I have went rabbit crazy. I think I've looked for a way to run one. I'm starting to sound like Bugs Bunny now. I've looked for a way to run Rescue Rabbit in various forms. Even have a machine build that runs Jinzo, because the meta right now is so trap heavy. And it runs like your Mechanical Chaser and your X-Head Cannons that are high attack, and 3 Cyber Dragons, blah blah blah, for Tyrus and Adrius. But I've looked for tons of ways to abuse the heck out of Rabbit. Whereas when it was a secret, no, I was looking at sticking with like Black Wings and older, better known to me engines. Whereas when they released Rabbit, I really went Rabbit crazy. To you, what's one of the more recent ones that's kind of went closer to a budget that you've worked on, Ginzo?
Well, I think that it would be best to just kind of like look at the meta as a whole and show the budget players who are interested in the information just how much there is. Because you pick Rabbit, and you're right. Like, there are so many variants of Rabbit decks you can build right now. So it's like not even appropriate to talk about one. It's probably appropriate to mention it as Rabbit variants. But I got a list here that I was writing the whole time we were talking. And so I want to mention, like, the best 3 decks in the meta right now are probably considered Fire Fist. It's new, it's aggressive, it has plays. Mermail, which we should all know, and Wind Up. Those are probably the 3 best. Now, let's look at this list real quick and see how many decks you can play depending on your budget and still be competitive and still also beat these top 3 decks.
Well, I'm going to say, since you mentioned Fire Fist, and if you're on a budget and you can't afford the entire Fire Fist, I've seen Fire Fist and Glad Beast splash together pretty effectively.
Yes.
Budget.
But here's the list. We have Chain Strike, Dark World, Agents, Inzectors, 6 Samurai, Rabbit variants, Exodia, Final Countdown, Gusto, Ice Barrier, Mist Valley, Gravekeepers, Hieratic, X-Saber, Chaos Piper, etc., etc. That's a lot of different decks that cover a large array of different budgets. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, it's really up to personal playstyle.
And that's another one of the biggest changes from back in the days of, like, Go Control, Soul Control, those days. Like, there wasn't this variety as a budget player. Like, if you were a budget player, you generally just got beat.
Yeah.
If you were playing one of the better 2 to 3 decks. Or playing against them, I should say.
I could always, when I first started as a budget player, I could always make it to top 8. but I was guaranteed within the top 8 to 4 to lose. Because, yeah, all the guys there were playing Soul Control, Goat Control, back when we had Dark Magician and Chaos and Time Seal. They were playing that stuff, and yeah, I didn't have those cards, so I couldn't keep up with it.
Mm-hmm.
So, my rogue deck could make it to top 8, it could make it to top 4, but it never went. I think one time I won the tournament and the kid went out stomping because he had like a $600 or $700 deck put together, and he went out stomping because he actually lost. It was a deck that everybody said doesn't work, and it actually still does, and it's crazy that it does. But it's called Macro World, and it runs Macro and Dark World together, so that if you don't have one part of it active, you can abuse the other. And the whole thing that it revolves around is ectoplasma, and either having DD Survivor or Malice Doll to burn and return. And that kid just stomped out because he lost to it. He was mad.
I'd have probably been mad losing to that too. Just because inherently, you said the name Macro World. You should never run Dark World with Macrocosmos.
You would be amazed at how well it plays. I played in a game, and I came back from 100 life points to win 9,600 to 0. Because it played Soul Absorption as well.
Wow.
So I burned, gained, and returned.
Yeah, that's the table flipper right there, buddy.
Yeah.
You should expect that.
Yeah, I left out the Soul Absorption part. That was what he was so ticked off about. He had me down to 100, and then I popped into Soul Absorption and just boom, 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 boom. I got up to 9,600 life points, and he lost. And he just kind of stomped out because he was running a $600 deck.
Yeah.
Easily, if not more. That's the only time, but yeah, as a budget player back in the day, yeah, if you weren't willing to go out and spend the money, you could probably make top 8, top 4, but you weren't going to top your tournament without spending that money.
Yeah, you'd be the table holding up the top 4 players.
Yeah.
That sounds mean, but I mean, that's just the way the game was. It wasn't as budget, project, gimmick player friendly as it is now. And in my opinion, it is a good thing. Where players of different budgets can still compete. That's the worst thing. I think being mad about reprints is a thing of the past. Because the first time they reprinted Torrential Tribute, that was something to be upset about. Now, it's the culture of our game. How can you get mad about that? It's just the way the game is. There's, if you spin, what was Tour Guide at its highest? $240, something like that? If you spend $240 and expected for that card to maintain value, you haven't been playing this game for very long, or you lack common sense.
It was
never going to maintain value. Exactly.
When it first hit, $80 to $100 consecutively. Yeah. And now, I think I've seen it $15 to $20 for the secret variant.
Yeah.
Because you could pick up the super for $3 to $8. Just depending on where you go and whenever you happen to be lucky enough to be on, it's going to cost you anywhere between $3 and $8. Whereas, yeah, those guys, like you said, it's kind of going into the tour bus. We're willing to go out and waste $240. This ain't going to get reprinted this quickly. Wrong.
And Shockmaster proved that.
Of it. That's where I go back to keeping your ear to the wind. There was talks of Rabbit and Tour Guide getting reprinted. I think the ugliest reprint they did of Tour Guide was the Black Rare and the Starfoil. Ugly, 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 ugly reprint.
Are you talking about the actual look of the card?
Yeah. The Black Rare reprint.
People who got them were like, I don't care how it looks. I just saved $220.
Yeah.
But I also want to throw a point out that Genzaki made when we were prepping for the podcast tonight, which was and I think it's pretty important to remember because it helps you build after reprints occur and you pick them up, is that usually, or on a general basis, when reprints hit the game, you cannot expect them to be what they were before the reprint, because they never are. Pot of Duality was a 3 of as a secret rare. As soon as it got reprinted, it stopped showing up in decks altogether.
Yep.
I mean, it still played and still got played, but it wasn't that necessary card.
Look at Mirror Force. Now we've got it at 2. Swords is at 3.
Well, Mirror Force is becoming much more relevant, I think, at this point. If you're playing in real life and you're in the competitive scene, you're probably seeing that as well. Mirror Force is doing work. But it's just good that that card got reprinted. That's another one of the cards that I think, should have been reprinted as a common, like Torrential Tribute or Call of the Haunted, very, very early in the reprint era.
Let's go with Solemn Judgment. That won consecutively for 4 or 5 years, $35 to $40 if you wanted the MRD version, and at least $15 to $20 if you wanted the Super. And that would span over years until it got reprinted in Agents.
Yeah.
That should have been one that was reprinted quite a while back because it was a staple. And honestly, I see less people running it now that it is a common. Are your really highly competitive players going to run it? Yes. But most of your players aren't going to want to waste half their life points because they're not going to know exactly when to play it. And that's where being a budget player and learning the mechanics when you start getting the reprints. I think that was a good move for Konami, is people start to look at those cards and they understand better. Like when Solemn Judgment first got reprinted, I played it at the wrong times all the time, and I wasted half my life points. Now I've got the mechanics of the game, and I use it in a lot more decks. I know when to use it and when it's just going to be a waste to use it. So
that's something I would like to say, though, is like, Solemn Judgment used to be a definite shoe-in into your deck. Now, I mean, if it's in a main deck of mine, generally, in Game 2, it comes out. Especially if it's a matchup. Especially if it's a matchup that could do something as silly as Mermail, where they can put 8,000 on board on natural monster effects alone, and that's silly. And so, like, you just put the game closer for them to win when you pay for Solemn Judgment.
For me, Solemn Judgment, Solemn Warning, I only run if I run Thought Ruler, Archfiend in the deck. Because you have to have a way to recycle or it's going to be a dead card later in the game.
Yeah.
So, I mean, yeah, the reprints even, yeah, it takes away from the relevancy when they actually get released because then everybody's playing it. And like Solemn Warning costs you 2,000 life points, so it can be a dead draw. Solemn Judgment can be played at any time, so it's not as dead as a Solemn Warning. If you pull a Solemn Warning late game, you've just got a dead card in your hand. Solemn Judgment can be played at any juncture in the game, really. You just hope that you play it right.
Yeah.
But I really only toss warnings in if I'm playing Thought Ruler because I'm thinking ahead that I have to have a way to recycle my life points because, yeah, if you pay 2,000 in a game to summon, you're giving your opponent part of the game.
You're giving them easier access to the win.
Exactly.
And there's a big discussion on that now, like, is Solemn Judgment worth playing? And it's a great card. It really is. But this game isn't the same game when we would auto run 3 of them. So now I think it is a legit decision, a legit, thinking point for individual players. Like, do I actually know how to play this card well? Because that's, if everybody has access to every card, easy. Like, you say you play Yu-Gi-Oh! And then the UPS man brings you every card you want straight from Konami, right? Like, the difference is still going to be decision making. Like the person who understands the game better and knows that, okay, your tour guide, even though I have a warning down, may not be a problem for me. But I think people are so afraid of tour guide that if they have warning, there's no thought process in it. They just activate. They pay 2,000 life points, haha, negated your TGU, and then still lose the game and not understand why.
And that's because if you lay a warning, you also want to have a secondary option down as well. So you know if that's going to be dangerous enough. Usually I wait for the Xyz summon or the Synchro summon that comes to decide if I want to even waste 2,000 life points to play Solemn Warning against a tour guide.
Yes, but that's also best case scenario mode, which I don't promote whatsoever. Because you're not always going to have a second option to set with Solemn. You're just going to have to put the weight on your shoulder to make the right decision. You know, and I guess that goes back to something that I mentioned way back in this podcast upon something you said, which was, I think one of the most important words for this podcast is understanding. You know, your budget, the success of it is still going to be reliant on your understanding of how to put that budget to best use.
I think that really ties up, what we're really going into. You need to, as a budget player, you need to decide what kind of budget player you are. Are you a casual player? Are you a competitive player? As in highly competitive, you're just looking to win. Or are you just casually, you want to get some wins, but you want to enjoy yourself. So, what kind of budget player are you? Definitely, if you're not already checking it out, use Dueling Network. It's free, and Yu-Gi-Oh! Pro, we kind of touched on. It's free. Go on and check it out, and that'll really give you an idea on if something's worth the investment. And always, 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 I hear so many people say, I just don't visit forums. I don't visit this. I don't visit that. The best way to get your information is to keep up on forums, because we work hard to try to get you the information first. We go out, we search it out for you, and it'll give you an idea, even if it ends up being a rumor, like Shockmaster was supposed to come out when Librarian come out. They put it off for, I believe, what was it, the Prophecy? No, it wasn't the Prophecy Destroyer 10. It was the second wave of 10s.
Oh, it was the Hanzo and Heliopolis 10s.
Yeah, second wave 10s that 16 hit in instead of, not Orcs, but Abyss Rising, wasn't it? One of the special editions was supposed to have Shockmaster, but
I think that was just a rumor, though.
Yeah, it ended up being Librarian.
Shockmaster is from the 10.
So, I mean, yeah, good topic to it. I mean, really, when you look at being a budget player, and Jinzaki kind of summed it up pretty well. What kind of budget player are you? And why do you do the things you do? So, I mean, you have to know yourself, and you have to know your mechanics. That's the big thing about being a budget player. Anybody with closing thoughts before we plug a couple things?
Not really.
Nope. That was weird, but no.
I think this has been more the Ginzo and Midnight Fox podcast versus Keo. We didn't give him much room to speak. I'm sorry, buddy.
Yeah.
But
I don't need to, because they're Ginzo. We would love to hear him talk from time to time, right?
Hooray for teamwork.
big thing I want to point out, I want to go into this. If you're not already going to it, go to erollj.com if you want custom play mats. Use the code MTCG2012. This is how we keep getting our price support from them. You're supposed to be getting an email over this weekend as to what we're going to be getting next. But Tri-Site tournament's coming up. That's going to be for the Inzektor Giga Manus mat. That's going to go in a raffle. If you are a member of all 3 sites, you automatically get entered in for a chance to win that Inzektor Giga Manus mat. And there will also be a Calcujotter in the raffle. So just for joining ETC Yu-Gi-Oh! Forums and Midnight TCG for the Tri-Site tournament, you get entered for a chance to win a free mat. The top prizes for the top 2 players, each person's going to get a Prophecy Destroyer 10. So that's courtesy of the Fox, but the mat and the Calcujotter is courtesy of E-Roll J. The next, after the Black Ship of Corn Flash tournament is over, the next one after that is going to be our Inzektor Dragonfly mat. And then I think we're getting some Mermail and Madolchi iPhone 4 and 4S covers. And we're also getting some new mats. So I'll keep you guys updated on that. Keep your ear to the wind within the next probably week or so. Once we have a confirmed ban list, you're going to see the signups go up for the Tri-Site tournament. Even though this is the Tri-Site tournament, talk to your friends. Still have the race to 8,000. When we hit 8,000 members, person who has the most referrals is going to win that Exodia mat. We do still have that contest going on. Anybody who knows a strong mage that's very adept at Magic the Gathering, we need a very strong Magic player. We're looking for somebody who is competitive in the competitive scene, goes to big events, and knows their cards. If you're a really strong mage in Magic, get a hold of SM. I'm leaving that mainly to him because Magic's his forte. We do still have our Duel for a Cure in the bottom. Right now, we're not running a contest for it, but if you still want to make a donation, you still go down to the Monster Reborn picture at the bottom, make donations to Midnight TCG's Relay for Life page. We're trying to do everything we can to help other less fortunate people. So, and I think other than that, I just want to mention for myself, kind of put this into a software discussion. Fox finally got all his certifications for his Microsoft. Having any computer problems, instead of paying Microsoft $200 a pop, you can come to Fox. I'm Microsoft certified. Remote assistance, I'll charge you $10 an hour, and your first case is free. Just so you can see what I can do. And TDA and Tamias will be rolling out pretty soon a trading, we're going to be doing something in trading that's not going to be physical, but it's going to be like a featured trader for the person with the most trades to kind of pick up a little bit in that area. And also we're in the works of coming up with a Mafia Awards system. So keep your ear to the wind. There's always lots of things going on Midnight TCG. I will give you a hint at as far as the Flash tournament goes. It's probably going to be attribute based this week with a twist, of course, because the Fox never leaves that out. But plan on sometime this month, since Valentine's Day is in February, that you're going to see a girly deck. So, this has been Midnight Fox and Enzo?
Oh, later, guys.
See ya.
Yo.
See ya.
For the Midnight TCG podcast, the Competitive Edge. Tune in next week. We're going to try to get Nomad on, and next week we're going to try to discuss card rulings and cards that are able to skirt rulings because Konami says so.